Hi, Viren.
Hey Ram, how are you?
Doing good.
Yeah,
How about yourself? Looks
good,
like
good.
you have some snow too.
Yeah, it's hot outside, so decided to kind of move to a place which is a little bit more colder. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah,
we have like a chilly 90-degree weather, so I got this too.
yeah, you can't complain.
Yep. All right, so let's get started. This is the first in a series of conversations we're going to host. You're the first guest, so welcome. We
Thanks.
we don't have a title for the series yet. We'll add that in the next episode, maybe. But again, the focus of these conversations is for us to have candid conversations, not completely boxed up official versions, which will also come in due time. We will do the official release, blog post, all those things. But I wanted us to have a chance to talk about topics of interest to you, topic of interest to me, and useful to the listeners
Yeah,
overall. All right. So I have a short list of questions. We can start with one. So, can you tell me what a workflow engine is? Let's start with that and then explore going
absolutely.
forward.
Um, yeah, it's an interesting question. Workflow engines have been around for for a long time now, right? Like it's not a new concept when it comes to computer science. But at the core of it, right, what workflow engines do essentially is they help orchestrate a series of tasks across both humans and systems, and in today's world AI agents as well. um, and what they essentially do is, like, if you give them a plan in terms of what is it that you want to kind of achieve, um, and how you want to achieve, they are able to then orchestrate across different systems, like, and get to the final step. And while doing that, they also take care of maintaining the state in terms of understanding where they are in the entire sequence of execution, what should happen next. uh, if you think about it, right, what they do is, they keep a record of what has happened so far. They know what should happen, and they combine this together to figure out what are the next steps. So they are essentially in a planning and execution engine.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, so this must not be a new problem, right? Like, there's like having different entities work by themselves and having to orchestrate them.
Yeah.
This must be going on for a long time. So,
Yeah.
what changed that Conductor had to be created?
Yeah, so I think this is not a new problem. You are right. This problem has been around ever since we started kind of working on systems which were like distributed in nature, and we started to put humans together with the systems. Um, and a traditional way to approach this is, like, I can write the code to do all of these things myself, and of course that works. But when you think about states which are very long lived, or in an environment where you have failures as norms,
Mm,
let's think about cloud, right? It's easy to say that we will always build a system that never goes down. A
mm,
reality is, if you try to achieve and build for availability, you end up with a bag of pain, right, in the end, longer term. um, Rather, if you think about the world as not being completely perfect, and we all know the fallacies of distributed computing, right?
yeah.
um, so when you start thinking about building systems which can essentially fail, and it's okay to fail, that is where you start to see a need for an orchestrator or a workflow engine that is able to maintain the state as a bookkeeper, understands what to do when there are failures in the system,
Mm,
and able to coordinate those things. Now that is much harder to do when you want to write everything in the code within your application, and because now you are building bespoke workflow engines, if you think about it, for each and every one of your applications, and
yeah.
building at scale, and to be able to handle the complexities and the requirements to handle failures and build resiliency.
Yeah.
uh, that's a lot of work. And that was
Yeah.
essentially the genesis of Conductor, right? How do we simplify that? How do we extract? that entire the undifferentiated heavy lifting, so that that is taken care, and in the
Yeah.
end you can generalize the whole thing, right? So that's at the core what Conductor tries to accomplish, and it does it very well at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this kind of makes sense too, right? Like if you're doing the same thing for different applications,
Yeah.
the natural thing is to extract that into its own platform or library, or depending on the level of abstraction.
Yeah.
So this is a tool by itself. So uh, like now that it's in production and many enterprises use it, so what are we hearing from them? What's the feedback like?
I think that's a great question, right? Like, and I always think about it, when you are building a product, right? As there are two folds, right? One is a technical problem, right? What is the problem
Yeah.
that you are solving? And the second is a human problem. For the end user, what is the pain point that you are solving for them?
Yeah.
And the feedback that I hear from the users, right? And these are the users who are using Conductor in open source, users who are the enterprise customers of Orkes. Um, is that what in the end it does for them is it helps them focus on what really matters the most, which is essentially focusing on implementing their business logic, going to market faster, right? As
Yeah.
opposed to now worrying about how am I going to kind of orchestrate across different APIs or service workers, or now I want to kind of work with a generative AI model, and how do I maintain the state, how do I kind of take care of the failures and resiliency, and once everything goes to production, how do I essentially make sense of it,
Mm.
look at it from the operational point of view. So this is where Conductor helps the most, and the feedback that we have seen so far is, when you always think about that 10x developer, right? A developer
Yeah.
who gets 10x done. The reality is that there are platforms that enables developers to be at their 10x because they don't have to do a lot of heavy lifting by themselves. A platform does it for that, and that is exactly what Conductor essentially gives you, right? It brings out the 10x developers in every one of them, and that's one
Yeah.
of the critical feedback that I have heard from users, that that platform like Conductor essentially allows them to kind of get that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense too. Yeah. So all right, those are short questions for you. Then like we can discuss about other topics. So in the interest of time, I'll turn it over for you to ask me questions, or I don't know, lead the conversation from now.
We are like as we talked about, right? Like workflow engines have been around for a while, and we have seen workflow engines orchestrating events, microservices, humans, and now we are hearing more and more about agentic workflows, and that seems pretty interesting. So can you tell me a little bit more, what's your view on that? What's happening with that agentic workflows? Where do they kind of fit?
So the like you mentioned, in the past couple of years, especially, there has been a significant uptick in interest in AI agents and agentic workflows in general, right? But as a field of study, AI has been around for a long time. We have been studying it for decades already. Uh, the other aspect is they are also an example of a distributed system, right? Where you have multiple independent entities, each of which can be an agent, talking to each other, talking to the external world, looking up from knowledge bases, affecting side effects like booking a ticket for you and so on. All these things are happening. So one of the patterns that emerges from different teams trying to implement this is a need for a good workflow engine, right? So if you take any recent papers that are published, or companies demoing their stuff and so on, one thing you can clearly see is either they have implemented a pattern similar to what you just described for a
Mhm.
workflow, or they could benefit from one if they have not already done that.
Interesting. And how do you see the interplay between, let's say, a generative AI model, microservices, events, humans? Like, do you see the world where all of these things are coming together to build an application, or do you think these are going to be like disparate entities, solving different problems altogether?
So uh, both are true. Both can be true. There will always be use cases where uh, some model or some particular tool or pattern is more applicable.
Mhm.
But what we are seeing is the convergence of different types of and different modes of solutions to form better solutions overall. Like if you take a step back and think about it, what's happening is we are getting better and better abstractions to think about how to deal with the different kinds of problems we are facing in the world and the different opportunities. So, and that's a cycle, right? You come up with better abstractions to explain what you have, to work with what you have, and then they help you in turn build better solutions to problems you did not know existed in the first place. So this keeps on happening. And as this complexity builds up, the need for better tools to abstract that part away also keeps increasing.
Got it.
And human in the loop, especially, is very valuable, right? Like
Yep.
there are many flows where, although these models are pretty advanced, we are still not at a position where we can trust them 100% in every scenario. But there will be scenarios where we need humans in the loop, either to approve or verify
Yep.
what some agent or some model has introduced into the flow. So, and as with everything, once humans are involved, the latency numbers become much more variable than if it's deterministic system.
That is true.
So, what you were saying as an example earlier about long-lived states or uh, wait states which last longer than a day or a year or however long,
Yep.
having a system which can handle that level of variability reliably uh, can only help, right?
That's true. That is true. And while you were talking about it, right, one thing that came to my mind was, you know, we often hear these principles, like, you know, especially in the finance domain, right, is like 4 eye principles. Like when you have critical things to do, you want like two pairs of eyes to kind of review the same thing. And the way I think about it is that, let's say, even if you have an AI model kind of making decisions for you, you probably want to have a second pair of eye, ideally a human supervisor, looking at the output and verifying that no, it meets the criteria
Yeah,
and the requirements before kind of it has kind of it is passed through the next stages.
yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
So the like some of that is like falls into the validation
Hmm.
phase of things. Like any, not just for AI models, but for any system that you deploy, you need to have a test and validation phase, right?
Yep.
Uh, so that validation itself can further be broken down into like systematized automatic validation, where whatever that flow is, you have some samples run through that with known expected outcomes.
Right.
That can be systematic and like mechanized. However, you also need random sampling. You also need human verification,
Yep.
especially if humans are on the receiving end of the output,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
yeah,
And making sure that the output conforms to kind of the validations that you put together, right? I think just today morning we were discussing about an upcoming feature on Conductor, right, where you can
yeah,
actually put it through against JSON schema and ensure that all the inputs and outputs are validated against the schema.
yeah,
That gives you kind of far better level of determinism. And if it
yes,
is not deterministic, it kind of fails, right? So I think I see the world where, like, workflow engines start to play a lot more critical role
yeah,
when it comes to generative AI and in general, like, the application building.
yeah.
Uh, and I think the way I think about it is that no, it's your operating system for running, AI workloads, right?
Definitely for AI workloads,
Yeah.
definitely for like complex workloads, you need the kind of support you can get by depending on a reliable and featureful workflow platform, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, because we make and sell workflow engines, it will sound like we are beating the drum of that, right? But there are other options also, not just Orkes Conductor.
Yep.
The technology as such, it's emerging as a pattern by itself. So the there's that. The other aspect that you mentioned, right, especially for Gen AI related flows, this whole generative aspect of using these models, and there are different kinds. There are auto-regressive models and diffusion models and so on.
Yeah.
Like training those models is a very complex and involved process overall, and that's not news. It has been known for a while.
Yeah.
So like if you observe how people have been coping with increasing amounts of data that needs to be constantly fed, and systems can fail, GPUs can fail. Like if you look at the Llama paper that came out,
Yeah.
they reference failing GPU cards as one of the interesting observations they had for why training stalled or what could be improved in the training process.
Yeah.
These things happen. People are realizing that more and more. And what you see, the solutions that come out in that space are also a workflow engine that gets abstracted out, right? There are products like Kubeflow, MLflow, that those exist to help with that. That whole ML ops as a field
Yeah.
is designed around making durable, reliable workflows.
Fair point. Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah, and like if you think of once the model is done, inference is also again a fairly involved process.
Yes.
We can dig into that deeper some other day.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting area by itself too.
Yeah. I think we should definitely dive deeper into. I know we are almost at the time, but love to hear your thoughts in the next session about inference and runtime aspects of the AI models,
Yeah,
and especially when they are interacting with other systems like databases, APIs, events,
yeah,
humans.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Definitely, let's do that. This has been good, Viren. This is fun.
All right.
So let's choose a different season for the background next session.
Absolutely. We'll probably go to the desert.
All right, let's try that. All right, bye, Viren.
Thank you.